Thanks for joining me on episode 965 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Mark Aho, author of Building Wealth and Living in Faith. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the right relationship between faith and money is key to doing that, and one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
The truth is, this is just 7 things, but there are tons of money attitudes, and they all affect us. But what we can do is find ways to begin to change who we are and what we do so that we can change our attitudes about money and thus change what's going on. Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world. In today's episode about investing in others through stewarding your treasures, I talk with you about 7 unhealthy money attitudes. I also share why you may have those attitudes, and I talk with you about what you can do about them. As we talk about stewarding your treasures, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without costing yourself an extra dime? Turns out you can. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show. If you enjoy the show when you're ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon. But the truth is, we all have really complicated relationships when it comes to money. Our attitudes towards it, our behavior towards it, how that affects our financial outlook, all of these things are related to our relationship with money, our attitudes around money. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the unhealthy attitudes that we take on. The first is avoidance. It's common to try to avoid working on and thinking about money problems. I've had clients in the past that when I ask them about bills and debt, they don't know because they just take those things and put them in the drawer. There's this feeling, because it often leads to a worry feeling, and we've talked before about how money worry and money problems are different, but because we end up worrying about money, we end up stopping ourselves from thinking about it because that stress and that anxiety is worse. And so we put off balancing our bank statement. We put off looking at our bills. We put off taking action, and we avoid it. Secondly, we often will have behavior that leads to overspending, an attitude of the fact that we think we need it now. It's often based in part on an avoidance because you're not paying attention to it, so it's easy to spend money that you don't have. And those little things can really begin to add up. We often also focus only on the immediate needs. We focus on what we need right now. It's that paycheck to paycheck mentality. I can afford it because I can afford the payment, as opposed to thinking about how it affects your long-term financial goals. We also have a tendency to always want and need more. Marketing does a great job of creating that feeling of you've got to get it, you've got to get more. You have to have more to be comfortable and to be happy, because as soon as you have something, you get comfortable and then you need more to feel comfortable again. We tie it to our status, and we have this constant need to do better and get more than we had before. There's also financial worry and anxiety. These things are not the same as the money problems, but the feelings, perhaps because of our childhood, perhaps because of earlier experiences, the feeling of worry around money is really big. And then there's a feeling of waiting constantly for your paycheck. Again, this leads to this mentality of living paycheck to paycheck and always looking at the next thing instead of making adjustments to our bigger attitudes and our bigger behaviors. And number 7, oftentimes we also have an attitude of miserliness or hoarding or holding on, accumulation rather than giving. The truth is, we all have these sorts of attitudes, and they usually come out of a history. They come out of our past. They come out of past experiences. They come out of childhood. They come out of dealing with these real issues as we grow up. But what you can do about them is even more important. If you're avoiding things, be honest with yourself and admit it, but then set small, manageable goals and perhaps find a coach or someone else to help hold you accountable. If you're overspending, you can work on setting a budget, and you can make a rule about avoiding debt because that tends to lead to overspending. If you're focusing on living on immediate needs and paycheck to paycheck, you can begin to make saving a priority. You could begin investing and find small ways to even do that in a tiny way just to begin to build that habit. If you constantly find yourself when you get a raise spending even more than you got, so your lifestyle continues to creep up and you always need more, you can do some real soul searching about what are your real priorities and values, and you can begin to find ways to be grateful for what you do have. If you suffer from financial anxiety, again, you can involve an accountability partner or a coach, and you can set aside dedicated time for working on what you do. If you're living in that paycheck to paycheck cycle and you're constantly waiting for your next paycheck, you can begin to set up automatic contributions or do other things to automate part of your bill paying. And if you're suffering from that feeling of hoarding and miserliness, you can set up a time and a way to give regularly. The truth is, this is just 7 things, but there are tons of money attitude, and they all affect us. But what we can do is find ways to begin to change who we are and what we do so that we can change our attitudes about money and thus change what's going on. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of treasures, you can sign up for our treasures tips by going to inspiredstewardship.com/treasures or text in the US 44222 treasures tips. And we'll send you 5 weeks of our best tips on stewarding your treasures. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.